I just want to say welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this immigration panel of serving the immigration community in Maryland. I just first and foremost want to thank all of our panelists who have dedicated an hour and a half of their time to be here with us. I also want to thank the Immigration Law Association, in particular, Paula Flores, for getting me in contact with these wonderful attorneys so that we can have this panel with you tonight. So to introduce our panelists, we have three immigration attorneys and one student attorney from the clinic at the University of Baltimore. I'm just going to go in alphabetical order of people's first names just to introduce them. Our first panelist is Devin Luqman. He graduated in 2013. He is a solo practitioner who has an office in Frederick, Maryland. He has won cases in the Maryland Court of Special Appeals, the Board of Immigration Appeals, and has been featured in the Baltimore Sun, as well as TLC's 90 Day Fiancé. So you can all watch that at a later date if you want. Our next panelist is Hayley Tamburello. Also, she graduated in 2013 and she is a sole practitioner as well. She has an office in Pikesville, Maryland and Orlando, Florida. She litigates to help families and individuals of all ages in immigration matters and helps people all over the country. She is also a former published law forum member, as she had a publication and a recent development published in 2015. Next, we have Stephnie Lurz. I'm sorry about the last name. She graduated in 2015. She works for SARC in Hartford County, and she mainly does U visas and WAWA self-petitions. And last but certainly not least, we have Franco Frega, who is a student attorney currently at the Immigration Sprints Clinic. So again, welcome and thank you all for being here. The first question that I'm going to ask the panelists is, why immigration, or how? How did you get to be where you are? Why did you decide to be an immigration attorney? Devin, do you want to start?
Well, I'll start off. Hello, everybody. First off, thank you for having me. And I originally loved criminal law, and I was a public defender in Howard County for about 2 years. And moving on from that, that was in Howard County. I'm originally from Frederick County. I wanted to get back home and work closer to home, to be honest. And the only opening was at an immigration law firm that hired me, and then I just fell in love with it. So I really had no intentions of actually practicing immigration law, but it is beneficial being a first generation migrant here. It's also helpful to know that for the family. And what was interesting about it is it's sort of like Connect Four to me, and it's important, but it has a game sort of atmosphere to it, where if you make certain things happen, you know you'll get a certain outcome. It's changed since I've, for the past few years, there's been a big change. But what fascinated me was just all of the potential options you have to apply, and something can come out of nowhere and then be available and help somebody change their lives. So that's kind of how I got into it. It was inadvertently, but I've fallen in love with it.
Stephanie or Hayley, how did you get into immigration?
I guess I'll go next. I actually, when I was at UB, I took the immigration course with Judge Gossard. I'm not sure if he's still teaching that or not, but it was a very interesting course. And I actually came to law school mainly because I had a long time interest in helping victims of domestic violence. So I began to learn a little bit more about immigrant victims of domestic violence and the challenges that they faced. And I did the immigration clinic at UB. I worked with Liz, and that was an unbelievable experience. I don't know where you all are in law school, but if you are at all interested in immigration law, I very much recommend the clinic. It's really a wonderful experience. And I had no idea that I would be doing this, that I would be interested in this. It just happened to be that the need and the immigration remedies for victims of domestic violence were just really interesting for me. So I ended up where I am. It was my first job. I'm still there, my first job out of law school. And I love it. And an interesting fact for anybody who might be interested in starting a solo practice, I am the only immigration attorney in all of Harford County, which when I talk about my work a little bit later, you'll understand why that's terribly problematic, but there is a void there that needs to be filled. So.
Hayley? You're on mute, Hayley.
Sorry, I thought I'd unmuted myself. So I actually went to law school not knowing that I wanted to practice immigration law. I was a Spanish major in undergrad, so I thought if I didn't end up doing law school, I might have been a translator and interpreter. But when I decided to go to law school, I thought I wanted to practice adoption law. And I ended up getting a part-time job at an immigration firm through a professor at UB who knew that I could speak Spanish, and the attorney that hired me needed a Spanish speaking assistant, and I just fell in love with it. It was right around the time that people were really starting to apply for DACA. So it was a really exciting time to get started. And I mean, I can't imagine doing anything else. It's such a fast-paced job. It's never boring. It's sometimes very frustrating. It's always very rewarding when you're successful, but it's constantly changing. It's always keeping up with politics and seeing, who's in charge really determines how your case is going to go. And so if you are a person that is worried about, am I going to be doing the same job every single day for the rest of my life? Immigration is definitely a break from that. It's constantly new, constantly evolving. And there's such a big need for immigration attorneys in Maryland. So I definitely recommend it to anyone that's remotely interested in the work.
Franco, why did you decide to join the law clinic, an immigration clinic?
So my story is really similar to Hayley's story. So I was born in Argentina and I speak Spanish. So the first part-time job I had in law school was an immigration law firm. So I really related to all the stories of all the immigrants because my parents are immigrants and I'm an immigrant as well. So like being able to help other immigrants and hearing their stories was something that was like really touching for me. So I knew that I wanted to be at the clinic and it was like my first choice. So I'm really lucky that I ended up getting in, and I'm working with Liz right now. She's still there. So she's wonderful.
So immigration law obviously covers a broad number of subjects. Could each of the panelists describe what specifically they do, if they do specific visas or applications or cases in immigration court?
Yeah, so I think, and I mean, other panelists, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think mostly immigration can be divided up in family-based, employment-based, like if a business wants to hire somebody and bring somebody to the US, or some type of humanitarian work. And it's not common for most immigration attorneys. It's not uncommon for most immigration attorneys to do family-based cases. That's something that is very popular, but you don't usually do employment and humanitarian. You usually end up doing one or the other. So for me, I do family-based and I also do humanitarian. So I'll do, someone gets married and wants to sponsor a spouse or bring a parent or a child. And then I'll also do immigration court. I'll do removal defense. So I do asylum cases, special immigrant juvenile cases, VAWA, U visas for victims of crimes. TPS, things like that. So a lot of the humanitarian work and the family-based work, but I personally don't do the employment-based. So Google would never hire me to bring foreign workers to the United States. That's kind of outside of my realm.
Yeah, I agree. I'm about the same across the board, is doing all types of different stuff except for employment and business related work. I guess when we say family-based adjustments, usually there's a spouse, somebody's married and is able to give somebody else permanent residency. Or when we talk about, Hayley mentioned special immigrant juvenile status, that begins in a local court as a custody case. If a child comes and has been abused, abandoned, and or neglected by one or both of their parents, and they could prove that in local court, it would then they can then get an order for special immigrant juvenile status, and that then moves to immigration to then they can eventually get a green card. And then Hayley mentioned some other terms that the audience may not be familiar with, but similarly the same. Like Hayley, you said TPS. If you maybe could describe a few of those acronyms.
So immigration is all about the acronyms. TPS is temporary protected status. So the United States government frequently gives out temporary permission, which in reality has turned into some semi-permanent permission just because they keep renewing it year after year after year after year. For immigrants from specific countries, it's commonly given out when there's some type of natural disaster. So if there's an earthquake in a country or a major hurricane that wipes out a lot of the country's infrastructure, the United States recognizes that it'd be difficult or impossible to deport people from that country to a place that might not have airports or whatever the case may be. That's been extended to also countries that are maybe at war. But so there's a list of countries, and if you came into the United States before that natural disaster started or the war broke out and you don't have a criminal record for the most part, you could apply for this permission to temporarily stay and a work permit. And like I said, it's called temporary, but in reality, there are people who have had TPS since the early 2000s that every 18 months it just keeps getting renewed. So to them, it feels permanent, even though it's technically not.
Yeah, I work for a nonprofit organization called SARC, which is the Sexual Assault and Spousal Abuse Resource Center of Harford County. So my work is extremely limited. I have only worked on U visas and VAWA self petitions. I am funded. I could do a T visa if it was for a victim of sex trafficking. I can't do T visas for other trafficking cases. I think I could probably do a gender-based asylum claim as well if it were to be based on sexual assault or domestic violence, but that also has not come up in my practice. So and that's why I bring up being the only attorney in Harford County. I'm very limited in terms of the types of cases that I'm able to do. So there's a whole lot of other potential clients out there who really need help, and I'm not able to help them. I can do referrals, and I often do, but I can only do cases where there is sexual assault or domestic violence, and there has to be a nexus to Harford County. So generally speaking, they have to either reside in Harford County, or if it's a U visa, the criminal charges upon which it's based would have to be filed in Harford County. So I'm very limited.
Liz, you think you could describe U visas for the audience? What a U visa is?
Yes. So a U visa is a visa that is available to immigrants who have been victims of specific types of crimes. And there are, there's a whole list of crimes. I am limited to rape, sexual assault and domestic violence cases, but there's a long list of other crimes, and the purpose of the U visa, the reason why they created it, is because we don't want criminals to get away with committing crimes because victims who are undocumented are afraid to come forward and report being either a victim or a witness to a crime that we would like to prosecute. So you have to be a victim of a very specific type of crime. It's a list, but a particular crime, and then you have to cooperate with law enforcement to continue to be eligible, and that continues. And it doesn't matter if they ultimately decide we're not going to prosecute this case, we're not going to go forward, as long as you participated in reporting the crime, as long as you cooperated, you did whatever it was that was asked of you, you can still be eligible. The VAWA self-petitions, they are available to victims of domestic violence who are married to either a US citizen or a lawful permanent resident. And there are others as well. So that they're for victims who are abused by other family members, but obviously as I said earlier, I can't do those. So I'm generally more familiar with filing them on behalf of victims of domestic violence and or sexual assault. But they're very complex. It involves a great deal of documentation. You need to be able to show that your marriage was entered into in good faith. And that's very serious. They're always looking to weed out incidents of marriage fraud. They don't want to see any evidence that you entered into your marriage just with the intention of getting a visa. You have to show that you were abused, that the abuse was severe, and you have to provide as much evidence as you can. They're very time consuming, but they're very rewarding. If you file as the victim of domestic violence and your spouse is already a United States citizen, then you are actually eligible for an immediate work permit while your case is still pending. If you are married to a lawful permanent resident, then generally they won't approve that until after they've approved your self-petition. I'm interested to see what's going to happen with that. With the U visa, they're taking 4 or 5 years to process. And because of that, you have people who are in this country who've been a victim of a crime. They've done what they were supposed to do. They've participated in the prosecution, and they're still basically living in the shadows. They don't have work authorization. They have to work unlawfully to support themselves. It's a very difficult life. It's a very difficult situation for my clients who are living that way. And one of the things that has happened recently that is very exciting is that the Biden administration is changing the rules, and they're going to allow people who have U visas to get work permits sooner. I haven't seen it happen yet. I have not had, and I do have a case that's 4 years old, so I'm waiting and I'm hoping. They did transfer that client's case to a different office, which I take as a sign that they are really making an effort to move these cases forward. And there is a lawsuit that's been filed in the 6th Circuit, basically on behalf of clients saying you're not, fulfilling your obligations to us. You're not in compliance with your own rules at USCIS because this is taking too long. So I'm waiting to see what the process is going to be like, how it's going to change moving forward. And I'll be interested to see if at any point it's addressed that there's also this gap for VAWA petitioners who are filing because they're married to someone who is a lawful permanent resident and not a citizen.
Stephanie, that actually brings me to my next question for the panel, which is you mentioned that the Biden administration is making changes. So one of the things that I think a lot of students are curious about is, since immigration law does tend to change in its regulations from presidency to presidency, how do the panelists handle that? How do you explain that to your clients, that these laws may be changing or that these cases take so long? So either question, how do you handle the shifting regulations? Are there a lot of shifting regulations, and how does that affect your relationship with your clients?
So I guess I'll start with this one. There are a lot of changes. For the moment, the majority of changes that I have noticed don't necessarily seem to be new creations of the administration. It's more of reverting back to the Obama years. So I have the benefit of time in that I was practicing during the Obama years. So I was already kind of familiar with these changes, whereas a newer practitioner that's just starting out now, it's a whole new world for them. But it's very common. I mean, that's the nature of immigration law. Whoever is in charge dictates the policy. And so when the Trump administration was in charge, the immigration court, the prosecutors, which work for the Department of Homeland Security, they were generally not amenable to agreeing to anything. They had to say no and object to literally everything, every single thing, even if it seemed crazy. I've watched judges say, "Why are you objecting to this?" And I've watched prosecutors say, "Because my boss said I have to." And there is nothing more frustrating than that happening. And we saw the past administration inform judges that they had to fast track cases. We saw the past administration penalize judges for being what they considered to be too lenient. And so now all of a sudden there's a lot more cooperation. Oh, well, you can talk to DHS and maybe they'll agree to dismiss one of your cases, or maybe they'll agree that we can limit testimony and we don't have to be so disagreeable as to all the facts of the case. So right off the bat, that's one of the things. Whoever the attorney general of the country is can cherry pick past decisions and rewrite them. And I'm sorry, my dog is in the background and she is deaf, so she cannot hear me tell her to stop. It is a lost cause. But you can have a situation where, the problem with immigration court is there's such a backlog that when we go to court, if I were to go to court today for our first ever hearing and I say, "Judge, we're ready for trial. Here's all my evidence. Here's my application. Give me a hearing date. I'm ready to present this case." The judge in Baltimore will say, "Okay, are you available March 15th, 2025? And I see some shocked faces. That is the reality of the situation in not just in Baltimore, nationwide. That is the situation in immigration court. It is that backlogged. And honestly, there's a good chance I'm not available in 2025 because I already have other cases scheduled for 2025. So I don't know who's going to be president in 2025. I can tell my client today, these are what I think of your chances of success. This is what the law looks like today. And based on the facts of your case and what today's law is, I think you might stand a decent shot. No idea in 2025.
It could get postponed in 2025.
I have a case that we went to court in 2014. We said we were ready for trial. They set us in for 2019. We had a snow day. We got reset for 2021, and the judge is going to be out on vacation. And now we're up to August 2024. And I mean, this happens constantly. So when my client started with me, Obama was president, and she will have court, and it will be theoretically while Biden is president. So it will be the third administration during the length of just her court trial. And it's possible it'll get rescheduled again because you just never know. She might go through 4 presidents or 4 administrations.
I think one of the hardest things for me is constantly having to explain to them that there's literally no one I can talk to. And that is the most frustrating thing about USCIS. There used to be a phone line for just attorneys who handled VAWA-related cases. And during the Trump administration, they took the phone line away from us. And all you could do was leave a message, and they may or may not call you back. But at least you had a phone number you could call. At least there was something you could do. There's no one. You can't even make an appointment anywhere. You can't even make an appointment to speak to someone. You never have a name associated with who it is who is processing your case at USCIS. There's no contact person. So all you can really do is wait. I mean, I can send an email, but rare that I'm going to get any sort of response other than the, bounce back message. We will reply if we feel that your particular situation actually warrants a response from us, and it probably won't, by the way. So I think that to me is the most frustrating part of practicing immigration law, is with the types of cases that I do, which rarely, I don't see the inside of a courtroom. It's not an impossibility that it could happen, but it hasn't happened. There's no one for me to talk to. All I can do is file the paperwork and wait for them to mail something back to me. And I have to tell them over and over, particularly with my U visa clients, because they take so long, I'm really sorry. And I tell them from the beginning, you're probably not going to hear from me for like 3 or 4 years. Just make sure I know where you still live and your phone number. Please keep me informed of where you are. And that's the best that I can do. And it's very hard, especially the way that things have been where they didn't even have a work permit. So that to me it's huge. It's the most exciting development for me in my practice for as long as I've been practicing, because that is going to make such a huge difference for so many of my clients' lives. But dealing with just how not only the courts are so backlogged, but just how completely understaffed USCIS is, and the inability to contact anyone it's the hardest part for me.
Yeah, I just wanted to
MBA is like the MBA is like Amazon customer service, compared to USCIS, immigration, USCIS. I was thinking the other day, this must be the closest thing to like living in or dealing with the Kremlin or something, because of how there's such a wall between what you need done, and increasingly, they'll make mistakes. I'm noticing that they're rejecting applications when they shouldn't be rejecting them, and there's no recourse that you have to take. You can't necessarily appeal certain rejections. So what are you going to do? And that's when you have to get creative and realize the success you're able to have sometimes in response to that is maybe appeal something that the instructions say it's not appealable, but you just try it anyway, because if they don't know what they're doing, maybe it might work in your favor. So and the backlog is incredible, and people's lives change, which is to me what I've noticed, the most. Obviously things happen in your life that are different when your case takes so long to process, and it may make the outcome in your case actually different. It may affect the direction your case is going. You may have a whole entirely different case to pursue to gain gain residency or gain the ability to stay here. And you have to stay on your toes and be able to keep track of everything that's going on over the course of so many years.
Devin, let me ask you, how do you handle all of the nationwide injunctions that have been happening the past year?
Yeah, it slowed down a little bit, and that's another thing. I think we all can go home an hour earlier now that the Biden administration's in office, because for me it was every other day we're reading something that and there were deadlines that were set. I remember being here at 8 or 9 p.m. to get, I can't even remember what it was, but to get an application out, because after a certain day, you would need to do, the public charge issue. So you had to, the Trump administration introduced a whole new application that basically required a credit report and all the financial aspects of your life to be put on paper and in evidence. And they were going to start denying applications that didn't include this comprehensive form. There was a deadline set, and we had a bunch of applications to get out before that deadline. And the deadline was like a Wednesday. So, we're in the office at 10 p.m. on a Wednesday. And then I think there was an injunction against it. So it was useless. The court stopped us from having to meet that deadline. So we're at 9 p.m. in the office for no reason. That would happen. That's a common reoccurrence. If you're in immigration law, you should be accustomed to, no matter how efficient you are, no matter how good you are, you're going to waste your time at some point doing something. And it's probably going to be once a week. And that just comes with the territory. But yeah, policy updates are, it's exciting, but it's also, you have to always constantly pay attention to it. And like you mentioned, Liz, with the U visa work permits, that's a great development. I haven't tried it yet. But yeah, you always have to be on your toes about policy updates.
There was one point a few years ago, it was back during the Trump administration, where they decided to start just denying applications if you left blank spaces where the information was irrelevant.
Oh my goodness.
Right.
Yeah, so
It
for
was a
example, if
nightmare.
you have a client who's 5 years old and the application says, what is the name of your spouse's date of birth, your date of marriage, place of marriage, blah, blah, blah. Tell me about all your children. Well, a 5-year-old isn't married, doesn't have any children. So they would reject it because you didn't put none for date of marriage for the 5-year-old. That's kind of what we're talking about when we say like the blank space policy.
And think about the effect of, if you have a client who is about to age out of a benefit, and you get the application in just in time, and then the Trump administration would make a change, your application would get rejected because it doesn't have the NAs in the application, and that client may no longer be, and the rejection takes 6 months to get to you. Your client's 6 months beyond the age that's required to get the benefit, and then they say tough luck. So that's a lot of that happened.
It was a frustrating 4 years, but I guess let's maybe refocus to the now and Maryland specifically. What are you guys seeing on the ground that affects Marylanders, the Maryland immigrant community?
One of the things that I'm seeing, it's come up multiple times now, is driver's licenses at the DMV requiring this documentation, even though they're not going to be eligible for the new license, the real ID. They're not going to be eligible for it, but they're still trying to force them to go through this documentation process, and they're delaying it and delaying it and delaying it. And then of course, because of COVID, you have to make an appointment to even get in there in the first place. So I've had a number of clients who are, I don't know that this is necessarily Maryland specific, but there isn't any reason why they shouldn't be able to get a driver's license, but it's being held up for 4 or 5.
It's the Real ID Act. That's what it.
Right.
That's
Yeah, it's not, it's, I'm sure it probably happens in every state, but in Maryland, at least, it doesn't, they're supposed to be able to get a driver's license here, and there isn't any reason to force them to go through that process when they're not going to be eligible for that anyway.
Yeah, post-COVID really revealed a lot of the work we're doing has nothing to do with somebody getting a green card or getting citizenship. A lot of it is, yes, I am having trouble getting a driver's license, or for our kids with special immigrant juvenile status who we're trying to keep them in school, they're having issues because now laptops are being distributed and nobody knows how to use them, or laptops are being distributed, but they didn't get one. And, so we have like 5 Chromebooks in the office. We were giving them out because people didn't have laptops to go to school. So there was a severe shortage during that time. When you get a work permit, you usually get a social security card with the work permit. We're noticing that the social security card doesn't come with the work permit, so people don't have access to their social security number or the card. Weird issues like that have to do with your ability to navigate and get things done in America were really a lot of what I've been noticing lately.
That's a huge problem for my clients too, the social security number. And that is completely COVID related because years ago, you used to apply for a work permit. And then when you received your work permit in the mail, which looks like a photo ID, it's a little plastic card, you would bring that to the Social Security office in person and apply. And about 2 weeks later, you would get your Social Security card by mail. And to try to cut down on that, immigration and Social Security now work together. So theoretically, when your case is approved, you get 2 separate envelopes, and one comes from U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, has your little plastic work permit, and the other comes from Social Security, and it has your paper Social Security card. And so that's how it should work. And in reality, I'm getting a lot of work permits, but I'm not getting a lot of Social Security cards. And so the simple solution is to go to the Social Security office and just apply for a social. Just say, I have my work permit, I never got a social. The form is not that complicated, except the Social Security office has not been open since COVID started. So I have clients who have had work permits for over a year now that can't get a social because the office isn't open. And the only other option is to mail your one and only form of photo ID to a government building in the hopes that it magically comes back to you. And those work permits aren't cheap. They're $410 each. So I always advise against mailing it anywhere because I just have no confidence that you'll get it back. So a lot of my Maryland clients are just sitting around, can't get a job because they have a work permit, but they don't have a social. That also impacts their ability to get health insurance, which is very important in a pandemic. So it's been really frustrating with the Social Security cards.
And just a side note with COVID, this is when we had the unique ability of, we're professionals, but we were in between this world of you're on Zoom only, but then you do have to risk your health and appear in person for certain things. I remember when COVID hit, immigration court, there were certain hearings that I was still going to, and I'm showing up with my client, even though there was a paper you could have requested a virtual appearance, but I'm not going to let my client go alone there. You're in the courtroom, but the government's appearing virtually. Everybody that's working with the government's appearing virtually at all times, and sometimes it works against you because it really it sort of dehumanizes the whole situation to a certain extent. But we get to experience the difference between, we get to go, we have to do certain things in person by virtue of our clients have to do certain things in person. And that was very noticeable to see, I guess, the gap in, you have it more well off than others, I guess.
That's definitely true.
One of the things the panelists you have all spoken about slightly is just how immigration law is interconnected with everything, whether it be social, healthcare, domestic violence laws, or criminal laws. What would you say to attorneys that don't practice immigration, or to students that aren't going to go off and practice immigration, to be wary of or mindful of when they potentially have a client that their actions could have immigration consequences for them legally?
Oh my gosh.
Well, go ahead. We're doing criminal law. I'll just real quick, doing criminal law. And I'll tell you, I used to be in the public defender's office, knew nothing about immigration law. And, we would get such a simplistic, and it takes a long time to understand. I think that's one of the hardest aspects of immigration law is criminal laws and how it intertwines with immigration law. And we got a little summary about here are the immigration consequences of certain crimes. And I read the summary, and I'm in court advising undocumented folks about if I plead guilty to this DUI, is it going to be a problem for me? And my understanding at the time was, they're not removable. I mean, it's not, you're not going to get deported. That's what the summary says. So I say, no, it's fine. You'll be fine. But the truth is, every conviction could have a consequence for them, and there's a much greater analysis that has to take place. So I firsthand can tell you that you definitely want, to have at least seek a consultation with an immigration attorney before you think there's a simple answer, because I thought I was giving simple answers, and looking back, I wish I could go and advise people differently for certain cases we had.
Yeah, I think that with criminal law, I had a client last month who is waiting for his green card. He's a couple months away in theory from getting it. He's been waiting for years. And he was arrested for a crime. He hired a private criminal lawyer in Maryland, and it was a case in Anne Arundel County. And luckily, I was able to kind of intervene and say, please don't plead to this one particular charge, because I know you think you're doing, we all have different goals. His goal is to keep my client out of jail. My goal is for my client not to end up on a plane back to his home country. And those goals are not necessarily in unison, because he might have to do some jail time to a lesser charge for the sake of not having something more severe on his record. So plea deals are really tricky. And so we were able to kind of intervene and lead him on a better path. And actually the state's attorney said, well, I don't think he's eligible for a green card anyway, because I'm looking at his FBI file and it shows he was already deported, which wasn't even true. He was just arrested at the border. That's how he ended up coming to my office, but his case is active in the immigration court. He was never ordered deported. He has court in a couple months from now. So it's doing a lot of stop. We need to talk about this before you act. That's not correct. It's a lot of, I don't know everything about criminal law. I am not a criminal attorney. I would never advise a client on criminal law case strategy, but likewise, you just know what you know and understand if you don't know something, it's best to get kind of advice from the people that practice in that field. And I think something that our other panelists can talk to more is that if you're not going to practice immigration law, if you live in Baltimore or if you live in the DC suburbs, where we have the benefit of a decent amount of services for the immigrant community, not nearly enough. The population is way too large for the services that are there, but there are some. And if you don't live in the 95 corridor, if you don't live between those two cities, it is very difficult to get any type of services. And our clients don't just come with immigration questions. They say, well, how do I enroll my kid in school? Or I'm having a problem with this, or how do I get, I was in a car accident and I have injured myself and I need to have some type of rehab. What can I do? And so, the clients have needs beyond just immigration. They have criminal law needs. They also have family law needs. If you're not going to practice immigration, my big push to everyone is always to try to take up a second language, because those people also need family lawyers and criminal lawyers and civil lawyers. So you can help the immigrant community without practicing immigration law, because they also have other legal needs.
Yeah. And the other thing when it comes to the criminal cases is when you're filing any kind of application, you have to tell them everything. So even if you didn't get convicted, they still want to see the proof on paper that you didn't get convicted. So when we had this push for automatic expungements in Maryland, I had a friend who was really working on that, and I kept reaching out and I'm like, but you got to make sure that with a person who has an immigration case that they get like 10 copies of whatever the verdict is before you expunge that, because once you do that, then they can't get a copy anymore. And if they can't provide a copy to the government, that could be a problem for them down the road. So.
Moving on to our next question, one of the things that we have seen recently is just the situation in Afghanistan, or we've also seen a lot of climate change, which we touched on earlier with TPS. Do you see the United States changing its immigration policies or taking some sort of responsibility for the actions it does that causes individuals to have to leave their countries of origins, even when they might not necessarily want to, but they do because they need to survive.
Well, on that note, what I'll mention that I do love, what I'm fascinated by lately is the aspect of climate change and how it impacts clients in removal proceedings, or how clients are coming to America based on asylum claims that could be, where climate change can be indirectly related. I also can't wait to try and just file an asylum case on humanitarian grounds and see what happens once, which it probably will. Yeah, we'll say once it gets bad somewhere and somebody has to come because I guess their whole island sunk, right? Or is underwater. Is that a basis for an asylum claim? I would love to ask that question. Or for example, you're seeing people who have their lives, they're coffee farmers in Central America, and climate change is ruining crops. So, and also with corporate powers becoming stronger, people are coming into their villages where they live and basically taking over water supplies, and then violence is taking place against them because of the takeover. So they're fleeing the country because an organizations come in and says, or farmers have grouped together and say, we want this water supply that you've had your whole life, or we want this area you've had your whole life, because where we live, we're not getting the resources we need. So you need to let us have it, or we'll kill you. So it's starting to become related to cases for asylum and people fleeing the country, starting to intertwine with why they're afraid to return to their country.
I could say for the situation with the Afghan refugees and the interpreters that were coming. So I generally don't deal with refugees. To make a little bit of a distinction, a refugee is someone whose case is actually processed abroad and then comes to the United States with a refugee visa. Whereas an asylum case, which is along the lines of what Devin and I both do, those are people that are in the United States first and then they apply after. So it's kind of the reverse. The Afghanistan cases were mostly already processed before they came to the United States. And they came in through Dulles Airport and they came in through Fort Lee in Virginia. And it was a lot of the nonprofits that basically took over that work. So I didn't personally have any clients that were affected by what's going on. I can tell you that an Afghan asylum case right now, I'm sure would be very strong and very compelling. However, if there's someone in the United States that were to come to my office today and say, I'm from Afghanistan, I can't go back, my politics are different, I would be persecuted because of my political opinion, I'd be persecuted because of my gender, whatever the reason, we would actually, if that person's not in court, the place that you would file for asylum is in Arlington, Virginia, which is the asylum office for the entire state of Maryland, the entire state of Virginia, and I think maybe North Carolina. I'm not entirely sure about that part, but definitely Virginia and Maryland. And the Arlington Asylum Office is going to take years to adjudicate that claim. So they're not going to get any type of quick relief. And their case could be also held up for years on biometrics issues. Everyone that wants to apply for asylum needs to be fingerprinted and their background is vetted. And when you have countries that are war torn or that maybe some of their buildings that keep their records are destroyed, it's very difficult to do a complete background check to the US government's liking. So it wouldn't surprise me if it's too early to know now, but it won't surprise me if years from now that we find that there's a lot of Afghan asylum cases caught up in the asylum office on background check problems. That won't be shocking at all.
So we've talked a lot about policies that don't exactly work well. Are there any policies in Maryland that you would say are helping immigrants or things that could be changed to help individuals?
Yes, Maryland is, I know we've gotten a little negative sometimes, but Maryland is not a terrible state to have to present an immigration case or to apply for immigration benefits. For one, we've had a lot of good law changes at the state level. There's been changes to the U visa policy, and maybe you could touch on that. But also within the past 10 years, there's been a change in Maryland to expand the definition of a juvenile to allow more immigrant children into state court to get an order that would declare them eligible to get a green card because they were either abused, abandoned, or neglected in their home country. So that used to cut off at 18, and the state legislature expanded that to under 21. So a whole group of kids that were previously ineligible became eligible. I think that a lot of the local police department, the local towns in some of the more progressive parts of the state don't necessarily cooperate with ICE. So if they pull someone over for having a taillight out, they won't automatically call ICE if the person isn't documented. And then also, even at the immigration court level, if you go online, and I could look for the link and try to put it in the chat, for the longest time, University of Syracuse, they were publishing the grant rates for asylum cases by judge, by city. And Baltimore is the only immigration court in the state. And I think it's somewhere between around 50% grant rate, which might not sound fantastic, right? Half of all cases are denied. However, when you compare that to other parts of the country, if you go to, say, Charlotte, North Carolina, or Atlanta, Georgia, those asylum cases, those judges are denying 98.9% of all cases brought in front of them. So I don't know how those attorneys are able to get up and do the same job every day when they don't grant anything. I think we're all sustained by the fact that we do have successes every now and then that keeps you going in the work. So Maryland, it's really not a bad place to practice immigration law. And I'm going to look for that link, and Devin, you already
posted. I got it. Yeah.
Good job. Thank you.
No problem.
And I was going to say, I mean, I work exclusively in Harford County, which is generally one of the more conservative counties in Maryland. But I get a fair degree of cooperation from the state's attorney's office and law enforcement when it comes to helping my clients with their U visas. I can't complain.
Where I'm at,
that's maybe surprising, but
I think the thing is too, it's discretionary, right? So they don't have to sign anything, and that's the benefit for you, is that they are cooperating and they are signing. So if you're asking them to certify something for your case and they decline, then your case is over. You can't go past go. It's done. So the fact that they are agreeing when no one is forcing them to is fantastic for your clients.
Yeah, so Frederick has these unique issues where, number one, we've got 287G, I think it's 287, which authorizes only a certain amount of police departments do this around the country. I think it's in the maybe no more than 10. Frederick is one of them, where police work with ICE and are authorized to detain individuals if they suspect that they're undocumented. So every time we speak to clients out here, I tell them, make sure you take down your rosaries and everything that's hanging from your mirror, and give police no excuse to pull you over, because if they pull you over in Frederick and you're not speaking English properly, which is the reason they'll suspect you're undocumented, they'll take you, even if it's a speeding ticket, they'll arrest you and then go check your status. Next thing you know, you have a detainer for immigration. So that's a Frederick specific issue. I will say the state's attorney out here, U visa certifications, getting him to grant them, it's about maybe a 60% success. So he's given a bunch of denials on those certifications, I wanted to ask you all if there was any other way to try to get a certification, because some horrific cases occur and we're just not getting a certification, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. Like you said, it's purely discretionary, so I can't understand why it's approving some or denying some. And it's frustrating. So those are unique issues out in Frederick County.
I guess moving on, my next question is, what is the panelists' favorite thing about practicing immigration law? If you could say you're talking to students or other attorneys that do other types of work, like what is the most rewarding aspect of practicing immigration law?
Oh, well, I'll start it. Definitely, it is when somebody's able to stay here. There's no feeling. I'm sure everybody would say that's part of it, a huge part of it. I never knew what that felt like, to be able to help somebody stay in the country. It's way different than somebody not having to go to, avoiding jail for 3 years or a few years. At the end of the day, you're coming back home and you can build from there. People are going to be sent back to a place where there's no chance of them, having a future or, possibly surviving. So when you're successful with cases like that, it really is life-changing. That's what made me, I guess, fall in love with immigration, because the reward, even though you're going to have some crushing defeats, and you'll feel like, why the hell am I doing this? At times, the rewards are much greater. So that's definitely why. The most exciting thing about it.
I don't exclusively practice immigration law. I also practice family law in my job, and I like all my clients, and I like my family law practice as well. When you are working with these clients, they are some of the most strong, resourceful, kind people you would ever want to meet. I mean, it's unbelievable to me how they have survived some of the things that they have survived. And I think that that's a big part of it. They're just very remarkable. You're meeting some incredibly remarkable, resilient people, and it's always feels like such an honor to have been any part of helping them in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with all of that. I think if you like politics, immigration is for you. If you like advocacy work, immigration is for you. If you like really going in and putting up a fight for your clients, immigration is for you. And I mean, I think we're all our clients' biggest cheerleaders. These are cases that, because they last for years, we see these families and the kids grow up, and you see, what happens to their lives, and you become very close to clients after working with them for so long. And so at the end of the tunnel, when they get their status or whatever the goal is in their life, and they can be reunited with a family member. I mean, the victories all don't have to be huge. It's not necessarily, I have my green card. The victory could be, oh my gosh, I have a work permit, now I could get a job. Or, oh, I didn't have any chance of staying in the United States whatsoever, and they agreed to dismiss my case. So I'm still undocumented, but I don't have to worry that someone's going to knock on my door tomorrow. I mean, the victories come in all shapes and sizes, but it's definitely what sustains you. And it's wonderful to see the clients, the look on their faces when they feel the sense of like peace and calm for the first time. And when a judge validates their experiences and says that, yes, what happened to you was wrong, and therefore you could stay. Or, I've had a lot of cases where the state court judges have said to the kids, you might have gone through this, but you are worthy, you are going to do great things in life. I want you to be successful. And just to see everyone kind of be like, yes, that's what I've been trying to say all along. It's really rewarding to see the clients feel that validation of what they've been advocating and fighting for themselves, and just to see their successes. There's nothing more rewarding than your clients getting their status.
On that note, I was looking through a message because it doesn't get any better than this I was asking my former client a question because she had a unique case, and I couldn't remember what we did for her for some reason. So I messaged her and asked her, what, we have a case similar. Can you remind me what you did? And she did, and I said thank you, and she says, I'm always glad to help. Thank you, trust me, you made the future for my family possible. I will always be grateful for that. So when you get stuff like that, it's easy to continue practicing immigration law.
So we're at 6 o'clock right now, so I want to open up questions to the audience. So if anyone has a question, just either raise your hand or feel free to speak up to ask our wonderful panelists your immigration question.
And I see Jacob sent a question about people that maybe are arrested for driving without a license or driving with a suspended license. Honestly, it's not a thing that I practice. I don't really do traffic court. We are fortunate in Maryland that an undocumented person can obtain a driver's license with a tax certification form showing that they've paid Maryland state taxes for 2 years. You can also get a driver's license if you have a work permit in Maryland. I've had issues of the work permits expiring and them being out of luck to get a driver's license until the next one is granted. I think, are the judges willing to work with immigrants if they can't renew because of administrative delays? I think it really depends on where in Maryland you are. It wouldn't surprise me if the answer was yes in Baltimore City and the answer was no in Frederick.
I feel like I went to Hartford once and it was terrifying. To court in Hartford. I think it was Hartford County. It definitely depends on the county. In Frederick, a judge will give you a deadline, but other
I
counties,
tell my
they'll
clients avoid Hartford County. I say don't drive there.
That is the county. Yes, you'll get like 10 days in jail for driving without a license in Hartford County. It's horrible, and the courtroom's all small and dark. It's terrifying. I hate it. Yeah.
So I see that Paula has her hand up. Could you give us your question? Hello. We can't hear you, so I'm going to read a question from Imani in the audience saying, how do you handle when clients don't pay?
Jeez, for me, it's just improve your process so that they pay next time. Yeah, that's a difficult one. It's easy to get bitter because people don't want to pay. What you do is you learn to avoid problem clients, to be honest. That's, I think, most of it. And you develop a client base that appreciates your work, and you have to value your work. But really, to clients that don't pay, we've all been there and dealt with them. And if I enter an agreement with a client, they end up not paying, the responsibility doesn't end for me. I'm assuming it's definitely the same with everybody else here. You finish the case, you just learn as much as you can from why that happened, and to learn as much as you can about the case. It might be a unique case. There's always, you learn something from everything. So, there might be something unique that happened in a case where somebody didn't pay at all, and you use it for another case, and the next thing you know, it's you have an amazing victory. So you just have to look on the bright side because it happens over and over and over again.
Working for a nonprofit, I don't have that particular. But I will say this about my immigration clients: when there are things that they have to pay for and there's no fee waiver, like I said, the most resourceful group of people. So I would think that they're probably easier to get them to pay than it would be to maybe get a citizen to pay you in their divorce case.
I can tell you,
I'm
a much better lawyer than I am a business person. So I struggle with that. It's hard. I try to be reasonable with people. The business side says you fire the client, right? You withdraw from the case, you ask the court for permission to withdraw, you give them the work that you have completed, and you're done. If you have continuous problems of, look, at the end of the day, you can only help your clients if you can also pay your own bills and eat, right? So I can't work for free for forever for everybody. I try to be flexible with clients. I understand, situations come up. I try to put people on payment plans. It's kind of tricky because you're not supposed to discuss your fees and how much you charge with other like it would be completely inappropriate for me to ask Devin what he charges on a case, and likewise. But I think it's very common for immigration attorneys to charge flat fees. Some do bill hourly, but flat fees is pretty common in the immigration world. And sometimes that bites you because you have a case that ends up being a lot more work than you thought. And sometimes, I kind of feel like it all levels out in the end. But you can do a payment plan easier if there's a flat fee. And the client's kind of like knowing upfront what their expectations are. And so that helps a bit too. But if you have a client on a payment plan and they continuously don't pay, at the end of the day, they have to go. You have to move on to another case, and you have to ask the court for permission to withdraw, or you have to notify USCIS and withdraw from the case. So it doesn't happen that often that I actually do withdraw over non-payment. I'd say that's pretty rare. But I will say, like, okay, so you can't make your payment. Can you pay anything this month? Like, what can we work out to get you kind of back on track? And no one wants to be called and harassing. You haven't paid me yet. Haven't paid me yet. So if you're willing to work with people, they will try to make payments. They don't want to be in a situation where they are calling and asking for help and aren't paying for the services either.
Yeah, technology definitely has allowed to people to be able to sustain their businesses, because the payment plans, you can put them in automatic payment plans. Now, depending on the amount the client deposits, if we're able to work with the client and take a lower deposit, we hold their card for an authorization to go through for a certain amount, every 2 weeks or every month, so that that you're going to be able to cover the cost of the case. But that's another unique situation, because some people, a lot of people new to this country don't have debit cards or credit cards. They're paying in cash only. So, you win some, you lose some.
Another question that was sent to me directly is, a lot of the material that's sometimes seen in immigration can be pretty heavy. What does the panel do to unwind or de-stress or make sure that some of these traumatic experiences aren't rubbing off on your day-to-day life or affecting you personally?
I'll let you know when I figure it out.
It's honestly an impossibility. It's really an impossibility. If you care about the work that much, it's impossible for you to completely turn it off at 5 o'clock every day. I find that vacations help. Is very difficult as a solo to take time off, but even if it's a day or two, it is very good to, reset, recharge the battery. It's good to have hobbies that have nothing to do with immigration law. It's good to have friends that do not practice immigration law, so you don't just end up spending time commiserating together and you have other things to talk about. I find, for me, getting out and about and doing things unrelated to the job really helps, but it is very difficult. Especially I see a lot of asylum cases that are based in gang violence and domestic violence, and it's a lot of very gory things that have happened to clients' family members and whatnot, and the clients will bring their trauma right to you. And, I have been texted photos of severed heads before because a client said, I want you to see what happened last week to my brother, and it's hard to shake things like that. It's really challenging, but you have to take breaks. I think that's the biggest key, or you're going to just burn out. You just have to constantly be aware of it and try to do other things to avoid burnout.
Yeah, I think immigration law is going to actually push you probably to where you know when you've burnt out more than a lot of other areas of law, because you're not going to know until, I'm not going to say something bad happens, but you're just going to know when you're not all tuned in to wanting to come to, let's say you come in late for like a whole week. That's when I know if I'm not, at the office at a reasonable time, I know that, okay, I think let me take a day off or something to clear my mind. But it's something you're just going to have to deal with. There's no way to turn it off. And that, it really shouldn't. I mean, it's you're dealing with humanity, so it's not going to be able to be turned off in your head. It's definitely not going to be for everybody. You're going to have to be able to deal with the good and the bad, but the good for me definitely outweighs the bad aspect of it, and that's probably what keeps you going.
And you can also, like, as a solo, I'll stop taking asylum cases for a month. I just won't take any new ones, and I'll say, I'm sorry, I don't have any availability this month. If you need immediate assistance, here are some numbers of other attorneys that I know and trust that might be able to help you. If you want to call me a month from now, feel free. And then I might take some different types of cases kind of to cleanse the palate a little bit. So I might take a citizenship case that's like a really straightforward case, or I might take a marriage-based green card case that seems to be, you could kind of tell the cases that are going to be very easy. And, there's always the chance that something pops up. But I think doing a lot of different things and not just one case type is a benefit that solos have, because we have control of our own workload. And I think that definitely helps too, to have a little break in what you're doing.
Another question I just got sent to my direct chat is, since cases take so long, how often are changed circumstances, either in the client's personal lives or their country conditions, able to affect the outcome of an asylum case?
So the thing that affects asylum cases the most when it comes to the case lasting for forever is honestly more of changes in case law than it is changes in clients' personal situations. But a lot of these countries don't rapidly improve their conditions over time. And so it's unfortunate, but it's reality, right? So my client that fled the gangs in El Salvador in 2015, the gangs are still in El Salvador. And, when you go to court, what will happen is DHS might say, yes, but there is a police presence and they're doing everything they can. And you could see they just created a new commission to combat gang violence. But for every time DHS can say that, as a defense attorney, I can combat it with a huge stack of articles and reports showing that actually gangs are even more of a problem now than they were a couple years ago. So I don't think changes in country conditions for the countries that I work in really have impacted my cases that much. I think for Central America, at least, I think I was doing some asylum cases for a couple different African countries years ago, and there were government changes of different political parties that were in power. And I think that affects asylum cases more than it's country conditions are pretty stable in Central America. In terms of how a client's personal situations change, you always get a judge that says, okay, well, you're afraid to go back because you were targeted because you were a teenage boy and the gangs recruit teenage boys. But now you're a 23-year-old man. So why can't you go back now? So that's kind of a common thing that happens. And sometimes you can answer that to the judge's liking, and sometimes the judge just doesn't buy it. But 23-year-old men in Central America also are persecuted by gangs, sometimes for different reasons. Now it might be financial reasons more than recruitment, but that's usually where it comes up is, well, it's been so long. Why are you still in danger? Why is anyone still interested in harming you after so many years? And it just kind of depends on the circumstance.
Yeah, the only thing that I think can come up and this isn't asylum specific, but with within, in my practice, you can file on behalf of derivative family members who may be in the United States, or they may still be back at home. And you have, as I think they've talked about before, certain age out provisions by the age of, you have to file before someone turns 21. But there are also other provisions, like they can't get married. If they get married, then they're no longer eligible. So you have these people whose lives are kind of in limbo for a very long time. They may have children that impact their willingness and ability to leave, or their needs in terms of, they want to come here, but now they also want to be able to bring their child. So you have personal things like that do come up because they go on for so long. I did have a client whose daughter finally just gave up and was like, I'm getting married. I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. So it happens. But I have to agree with Hayley. It's really more the changes in the law and the administrations that impacts their cases more than anything else.
Another question I just received is, besides the legal elements of cases, how much is left up to the judge's discretion? Or I guess to rephrase it, is there certain judges that you feel are more favorable to certain outcomes? Not to name specific names, but do you believe that different judges can determine the outcome of a case?
It's in removal proceedings. I think that immigration judges, they can choose what type of immigration judge they want to be. As far as if they want to deny 99% of cases, they can find the legal grounds to do so. I think immigration law is crafted in such a manner, maybe it's overturned later, but there is so much case law, and so the law is crafted in a way that if you are in a position of power, you can use it to back up the way you think about a case. So immigration judges can pull from so many legal areas and cases to support how they feel about whether your client should win or not. And you see this basically nationwide. And like Hayley was saying, Maryland is okay with immigration. I think it's good. I think if you look at the grant rates, I think it's maybe 60% or a little bit above 50%. But there's places, like we went at my previous law firm, we did a case in Texas. I can't even remember where the court was, but it's a court where only basically one person has won in the whole life of the court. Basically, they're denying everything. You have a claim that you would win in Maryland, but you're losing it somewhere else if you're in a different location. So definitely, it matters where you are.
Yeah, I think that some of the judges are very predictable in how they are going to rule, and you don't have a say in who your judges. You can't really change judges, so you get who you get. So I have judges where I feel very confident I'm going to win a case. I have judges where I feel significantly less confident. And then I think there are also judges that, I'm certain that whatever side of the bed they woke up on that morning is going to determine the outcome. And that is the most frustrating type of judge. I had one judge where he granted asylum to a client of mine. And when you seek asylum, you have to show that your client is eligible because they're being persecuted because of a protected ground. It could be their race, their nationality, their religion, their political opinion, or there's kind of a catch-all provision. And so this judge granted asylum on the basis that she was persecuted because she was a Honduran woman. Full stop. She's a Honduran woman. There's enough evidence to show that Honduran women are persecuted, and she qualifies for asylum. And a week later, same judge, very similar fact patterns, denied because it has nothing to do with the client, has nothing to do with the client's story, denied because the phrase Honduran women is an overly broad phrase. So I don't know what you do with that at that point. It's very, you just appeal a lot of things.
So,
You know,
or
the
some
other,
judges will have their own rules in their courtroom.
yeah, and then we had that period. Do you remember, Devin, when they were sending us visiting judges for
Oh, and this was
summer?
the biggest shock from the Trump administration. There was some Trump judge that was there,
That was the
and we're
worst.
doing bond reviews. Were you in the courtroom that day? Oh, but I was lucky because it was a visiting judge, and the main judge, what's her name again? The detained judge,
Oh, Judge Kessler.
Judge Kessler. So she had a visiting judge who was definitely Trump appointed, and they were trading off. Well, no, she was doing bond reviews. You know, I was the last one she got to, able to get my client out. And right after me, the judges switched place. And a case that was less serious than mine goes forward in front of this other judge, and he says no bond. You know, and it's normally definitely a bond. And the whole court, I was like, oh man, it's craziness. Yeah.
It's so frustrating. So the judges are federally appointed, right? And they work for the Department of Justice, and so they could be moved wherever. It's not like, you know, in Maryland, you'll have the governor will appoint someone and they will sit in that court. So we had at least a full summer, if not longer, where your judge assignment would be visiting judge 1 or visiting judge 2. And we had judges from Florida. We had judges from Chicago the one week. We had multiple judges from Texas. They were from one from Boston. I think they were from all over. And I had a case, and it was, in my opinion, a pretty strong case of a older teen who had been harmed because he was gay, and a neighbor had correctly assumed that about him, and so his life was most certainly in danger if he returned back to his home country. And we had originally been assigned a Maryland judge, and I felt we had a pretty good shot at it. And just the week before, we find out that we have this mystery visiting judge, and it ended up being a judge from one of the courts in Texas who did not believe that gay Central Americans were deserving of asylum. He thought that that opened up some type of floodgate and denied the case. And my jaw was to the floor on it, because it should have been kind of this slam dunk thing. But all of a sudden you get a personality from another part of the country who just has completely different beliefs about the law, who comes in, who also might not know the correct circuit law, because we're in the Fourth Circuit and we have judges visiting from other circuits, and you're somehow supposed to expect that they understand circuit decisions from places where they're not used to practicing in. So that was probably the most crazy ever, was the period of visiting judges. Now that has kind of calmed down. And the reason they did that was because there's this huge backlog, right? So they were taking judges from courts that weren't as overloaded with cases to try to step in and get Baltimore up to speed. And they were doing this with other immigration courts nationwide too. Now, Maryland is supposed to get a second immigration court. I heard potentially in December of this year. That will be in, I think, Silver Spring, but I'm not entirely certain of that. I heard 15 new judges, which is crazy because we currently only have 7 on the bench now. So you're more than doubling our court size. So I don't know what's going to happen, if our cases are going to get transferred. I don't know who these 15 new judges are going to be. I also know, and you can all ask Professor Keyes about this, because her husband sits on the bench, how long he had to wait before the paperwork finally went through. So these might not necessarily even be people that applied during the Biden administration. They might be brand new judges. They might be transferred from other parts of the country. So I guess we'll wait and see, but that's going to make it really interesting when they expand that court.
You've all discussed having clients that are facing potentially devastating circumstances if they return to their original country. What do you do as attorneys to alleviate that stress from your clients? Or do you do like plan Bs, or how do you plan in case you're gonna lose and you have a client that is deadly afraid to return?
Yeah, I think you always discuss that. I just like to discuss all the possibilities at the consultation, and constantly Make sure you answer all their questions. Really, I think that's what calms them the most, is giving them the ability to ask questions, and explain all of the possible circumstances, and ask them if they understand, and make sure they understand it. I think that's definitely the way to go.
I think that for me, I try to be really honest with the clients about my opinion on their chances of success. That doesn't necessarily alleviate their concerns, right? Because I might tell them, look, you have a really weak case. There's a very slim chance of success here. I'm looking at the judge you have. I'm looking at the fact pattern. I think we can make a colorful argument, but I have sincere doubts that the court is going to go with this. I think it depends on how you measure success for your client. And sometimes in that case, success is, well, if you didn't do anything, they were going to order you deported at your first hearing. But we've put forth a case. We have this argument. I mean, you can't create a case where there is none. You can't lie about facts. But if you can make a colorful argument to go for asylum, I will take a very weak asylum case, because I believe that everyone should have their day in court to explain why they should be able to stay in the US, right? So the success for them might look like you've been able to stay here for 4 years, and we might appeal it. And obviously we would love to win, but you're also going to stay an extra 2 years on the appeal. And the thing that my clients hold on to in terms of hope is that there's always a chance for some type of immigration reform, right? And I always say you can't benefit from immigration reform for the most part if you're not in the United States. So the benefit of time is not only time of guaranteed safety. So my client who has court in 2025, she knows that no one's going to harm her tonight or tomorrow or the next day up until that court hearing. And then we can appeal if it doesn't go our way. But she also is holding on to the hope that there could be some new law that will happen between now and then that she might also benefit from. So I think it kind of depends on how you measure success on an individual case. But I definitely don't do a lot of like, it'll be okay, it's going to work out in the end, because I don't know that to be the case. And I don't want my clients to say, well, you told me at the beginning that we were going to win this, or like you made me think that this was going to be okay. And now you're saying we might not win. So I try to be very realistic with expectations.
So we are almost at time, so I'm just going to ask one more question that appeared in the chat for me, which is, we've talked about the consequences of criminal law in immigration cases, but the individual is curious about civil cases. Is it risky for someone that doesn't have any legal status to be a plaintiff in car accidents or slip and falls, or do they just avoid the courts altogether?
I would say not at all. They can absolutely assert all the rights they want in civil court.
Yeah,
That's a misconception.
Civil cases don't seem to have much of an impact on immigration.
But it's a commonly asked question, can I pursue it, because I don't have status, but they can.
I think it comes down to people not necessarily knowing what their rights are and thinking, oh, because I'm undocumented, can I ask for this or can I sue for that? And I'm sure that this crosses over a lot with T visa, the trafficking cases, and maybe even the labor trafficking cases where people aren't paid their fair wages. I mean, that often will lead to some type of civil action. But I never want my clients to feel like they're being taken advantage of and can't do anything about it simply because of their immigration status. So if they have a reason to go into court for a civil matter, I don't represent them in civil matters, but it doesn't impact their case. And I tell them if that's what they want to do, then they should go for it.
Well, thank you. So we're at time now. So the last thing I'm going to ask is, do the panelists have any closing statements or any last words they would like to leave the audience with? If not, then thank you for your time, and thank you for everyone who came here to listen to these wonderful attorneys.
Thank you. Good luck to
Thank you all
everyone
for
with
having us.
your studies, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions about immigration law, and always happy to chat.
Well, have a nice day, everyone then, and this panel's over. Good night.
Bye. All right. Thank
Good
you.
night.